Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, I'm going to be going through the 10 greatest performances on guitar on a jazz rock album. And we're going to be picking primarily from the 1970s. Why would I want to only pick from the 1970s, you ask? Or you may not ask, but if you have or you haven't, I'm still going to answer the question for you. Because I believe that something happened in the 70s, especially in the early 70s, which was quite remarkable in the realm of rock music. And suddenly music which was technically difficult, which was very advanced harmonically, rhythmically, production-wise, without vocals, suddenly became a force culturally for a few years. And within that area stepped a number of guitarists who took the guitar and pushed it up to another level. So while the mainstream audience were aghast at the likes of Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page and Richie Blackmore, in the realm of jazz rock, you then had John McLaughlin, Aldo Meola, Larry Coryell, and other players of that ilk. And of course, in the guitar world, this would have been like a bomb going off. You know, guitarists at the time would have been completely mystified listening to these jazz rock fusion guitarists who seemed to bring in the power of rock, the emotionalism of the blues, and a picking technique and approach to the guitar that was taken from virtuoso guitars like Tal Farlow, Wes Montgomery, Charlie Christian, Barney Kessel, but applied that to high-powered, loud, distorted guitar, really laying the foundation to what we might call metal guitar playing. The closest thing we have to heavy metal guitar playing in 1971 is perhaps John McLaughlin's incredible work on the first Mahavishnu Orchestra album, In a Mountain Flame. So on this, I'm going to come up with 10 albums from the 1970s that are examples of this revolution that happened in the guitar at that time. Of course, these are my personal favourites, and I'm sure there's a whole ton of omissions on here. But I think these are pretty correct. I think I've got some, definitely got some very important albums. I've got some albums to offer you from guitarists that you might not readily associate with that guitarist. And in a couple of places, I perhaps got albums that you don't know that well. So if you're a guitar aficionado or a jazz rock fusion fan, or just, a nosy and interested music fan, this is the video for you. So shall we get straight in there at number 10? At number 10 from 1975, I had the album Joyful Lake by Pat Martino. Now, Pat Martino is one of three guitarists that emerged in the early 1960s, a generation below the likes of Wes Montgomery and Joe Pass. These are guys that were born early enough to be brought up in a classical and jazz tradition, but also young enough that when they got into the 1960s and they were in their early 20s, maybe just about, they were able to then pick up on what was going on in the rock world, especially bands like the Beatles. The Beatles went over to the States in 1964 and almost like begat a generation of musicians that were going to go on into the American music scene and basically write the book. Now, these three guitarists that emerged, I would say, and they're all roughly around the same age, would be George Benson, it would be Larry Coryell, and it would be Pat Martino. George Benson pretty much stuck to his sort of jazz guitar roots, really coming out of a player like Hank Garland, but was still able to find a space by the mid-70s with his album Breezing, which sold around 1 million copies, to find a place for that sort of easy listening but high quality jazz funk. Benson I class as being cheesy but brilliant. And Benson always allows space on his albums, however funky and cool they are, for some serious soloing. And I could have put Breeze in here, but it's not really jazz rock, is it? Of course, Larry Coryell, coming from the same time, was the most open of these guitarists, and he was very interested in country guitarists. He was listening to, rock and roll guitarists like Scotty Moore. He was also listening to Latin influence guitarists like Gabor Szabo, Wes Montgomery, but also the Beatles, Hendrix, Clapton. He had the whole lot. And Larry Coryell, more than anyone else, is probably the guy that really birthed jazz rock. But it's not him. Of course, he will be on this list, but not yet. Now, I'm going to go for Pat Martino, who, like George Benson, carried on exploring that much more clean tone, alternate pick approach to jazz improvisation. What Pat Martino brought to it was a fresh harmonic approach, you know, where he really opened up a certain way of playing harmonies on the guitar, which I think laid the path for people like Alan Holdsworth later on. Most of his albums are relatively in the straight world, you know, straight jazz world. But in 75, I think probably from pressure from the amount of records that the jazz rock guys were making, he goes into the studio and records an album called Joyful Lake. And it is an incredible album if you're into guitar playing. What we have here is Pat Martino. His tone's a little bit more biting, but what you hear is the precision of his approach, the virtuosity of his harmonic sort of background and language that he utilises in a more sort of modal jazz rock setting, and he allows the band to operate a lot freer than a lot of the jazz rock that was being made around that time. It's an incredible album. It's an album I haven't explored enough, to be honest. I've only come to it recently, assuming that Pat Martino had never made a jazz rock album. But it's an essential album as far as I'm concerned, and it's a great place to start at number 10 with Joyful Lake. Let's move on, shall we? So at number 9, and this is pretty low. I think this is pretty low on the list, actually. We'll have to see whether this is right. At number 9, I have Spectrum by Billy Cobham. The Mavish Orchestra, of course, in the early 70s when they emerged, not 71 with the aforementioned Inner Mountain Flame, really creates the language of jazz rock. And at that time, it's not all funky and hooks. It's about stop-start Indian classical rhythms, insane ensemble playing, playing at like 100, 200, 300, 400 beats per minute. It's all very extreme, in your face and brutal. And Billy Cobham was very important in creating the language of drums for jazz rock fusion, which was a sort of additive time, Indian rhythm influenced approach to breaking up odd time signatures with this sort of a machine gun approach around the drums. And it was astonishing drummers at the sheer speed he had around the kit, which was aided in part by the fact that he played open-handed, which must have also seemed very alien to a lot of the drummers that were around. So in 73, before the Mavish Orchestra had called it a day, he gets an offer from Atlantic Records to make a solo album. And he goes into the studio with 2 bands. One of the bands is a cut-down, you know, bass guitar, drums, keyboards, with Elaine Sklar on bass. We've got Jan Hammer on keyboards, absolutely incredible. And on guitar, he goes and grabs a rock guitarist. Now, this is a moment of genius from Billy Cobham. He understands that he's not playing bebop tunes anymore. He doesn't need someone who can play that language. What he needs is someone who can play like Hendrix. Hendrix in the late 1960s, especially on the album Band of Gypsies, and especially on the track Machine Gun, I think really basically invents jazz rock fusion by taking a modal approach to the blues, which he's really pulling on John Coltrane at that point. And I think Billy Cobham realises that an exploratory rock guitarist can move into that space. And lo and behold, he comes across one of the greatest guitarists of the 1970s, Tommy Bolin, who at that point had played in a band called Zephyr and was playing in the James Gang. And he brings Tommy Bolin into this sort of jazz rock setting, and Tommy Bolin sets it on fire. Suddenly we have the real deal, especially his guitar solo on Stratus, over this hypnotic, almost dubby bass line, and just bass guitar, drums, hardly anything there. And Tommy Bolin just steps in, and it's absolutely wonderful. And those who are listening to the likes of Larry Coryell and John McLaughlin and all that speed and fury and, you know, sort of jazz chops push through the rock-ometer, Tommy Bolin's doing something different, and it really opens up the realm to have much more funkier, bluesy guitars coming into jazz rock fusion. But I must admit, his input here in terms of being a rock guitarist playing jazz rock has only possibly been surpassed by Jeff Beck, maybe. And of course, this album coming out in 73, at that time, Jeff Beck was still pursuing a sort of quite funky power trio. And by 75, he had really taken on this sound that you hear on this album on Spectrum. So Tommy Bolin then went on to sort of superstar level. He signed his own deal. He made some incredible records on his own, like Private Eyes and Teaser. And eventually, when Ritchie Blackmore leaves Deep Purple, he lands that job in Deep Purple. And really, he should have then ascended to legend level. But after a year or so playing with Deep Purple, he died around about the age of 25 of a heroin overdose. He has gone down as a legend. He's one of my favourite guitar players, and there is scant guitar solos out there to listen to. Well, there's quite a lot, but considering he was only really around for about 4 years recording, you're having to pick and choose. Without doubt, his finest moment is Spectrum by Billy Cobham, and that's why I've got it at number 9. Right, so as I said, Larry Coryell's key to this genre. He first emerged in the Chico Hamilton band, and Chico Hamilton was a jazz drummer that had gone from a sort of third stream approach, i.e. bringing in sort of classical influences using cellos and flutes in the 1950s, and then suddenly in the 1960s he gets a lot earthier and he starts to explore African rhythm, Latin rhythms, Spanish rhythms, and he starts to bring the electric guitar in. And Larry Coryell is the right man in the right place because he can play all that Wes Montgomery stuff. But like I said, his vocabulary is much wider, and he brings in country licks, rock licks, blues licks, rockabilly licks. He brings it all into the mix. Around that time, he's right in the middle of a whole bunch of musicians who are also interested in bringing in pop and rock music into jazz. This is the early jazz fusion, and Larry Coryell's work in the Free Spirits and with Gary Burton is genre defining. In 1970, John McLaughlin comes from the UK, who has been pursuing similar ideas, but without the vocabulary that Larry Coryell had, but with more brutal chops. He comes over in 1970s, does an album with Larry Coryell called Spaces, and John McLaughlin seems to steal Larry Coryell's thunder. But I felt if you really want to hear the guy that invented jazz rock guitar, it's Larry Coryell. Now, Larry Coryell suffered from having some poor deals. He never landed the Atlantic Records or CBS. He languished on a bunch of albums that weren't that well produced in comparison to those. And also he had a terrible drink and drugs problem, and it seems to have kept him out the loop. By 73, he did form the 11th House, which is an incredible jazz rock group, but again, didn't quite reach the heights of the Return to Forevers and the Mahavishnu Orchestras. In fact, in 73, 74, he came over to the UK and opened up for Return to Forever. So he was definitely playing support to the big fusion bands. But before then, he was playing in a way that really took Hendrix, but took the vocabulary of bebop, the modal vocabulary of Coltrane, and he brought out some albums that I think are absolute masterpieces in the jazz rock world. And the one I'm going to go for that you must go and listen to, it's absolutely incredible, is the album Offering, which I think is coming out around about 72, I think. And compared to the 11th House, this has much more of a free-flowing approach. It's like the Band of Gypsies, but with jazz chops. And Larry Coryell it has a level of technique that surpasses any rock guitarist of the time. It's quite astonishing what he's doing, and it's a shame that for me he has always lived under the shadow of John McLaughlin, which he himself revered greatly. He was a great supporter of John McLaughlin and gave him that profile on the Spaces album. The Spaces album's gone down in history because John's on it as being one of the great fusion albums. It's not a fusion album, it's a jazz album. It swings. There's some acoustic guitar stuff that sounds like the Hot Club de France, or more accurately, René Thomas, the Belgian jazz guitarist, and some stuff which is sort of swinging jazz. I never really thought it was in the same league as the 11th House or these albums at all. So, yeah, if you want to go and check out Larry Coryell at his greatest, this is possibly his greatest album. I mean, it's not that well known. It's called Offering from 1973. Go and check it out and tell me what you think. A guitarist that I've been a little bit negative about, that also emerged in the early 70s, part of the jazz rock thing, was John Abercrombie. And I felt bad after I did that. There are many albums I like very much with John Abercrombie. Now, John Abercrombie came in to the Billy Cobham group after Spectrum, and he played on 3 albums, Crosswinds, Total Eclipse, and Shabazz. And I was never a fan of the guitar playing on those albums. Just to show you, I don't just, like jazz rock, whoever plays this. Yeah, I always felt that John Abercrombie was a little bit of a... I mean, the guy knows his jazz. He's like a sort of Jim Hall style player. He has some technique, but he's not in the sort of alternate picking realm of John McLaughlin. And in a way, he actually... paves the way for people like Schofield and Pat Metheny that are going to come in the future. He's a very exploratory player, and I think I was put off by him by the sort of wah-wah pedal abandon that we often find on the Billy Cobham albums. I have to say his guitar solo on Crosswinds is pretty good, the actual track Crosswinds. But around about 75, he went to the studio with an incredible band, a one-off band. Well, not actually a one-off band, because they did another album together. We'll get onto that in a minute. John Abercrombie goes to the studio with an organ trio, and that organ trio comprises of Jan Hammer, and on drums he's got the great Jack Jonnet. This band is almost like the flip side of the Tony Williams lifetime. And some of it is very fiery, but it also explores much more ambient areas. Jan Hammer is the true genius of jazz rock. I believe that undoubtedly, that he was doing things that nobody else was doing. And his approach to organ here is on a par with somebody like Larry Young. It's absolutely incredible what Jan Hammer brings to this album. Jack DeJohnette obviously is drawing from a sort of real synthesis of sort of Elvin Jones style jazz drumming and rock beats, influenced by James Brown's drummer, Clyde Stubblefield, Jabbo Starks, who he had filtered through in the Miles Davis group. Miles had really channeled him. So Jack DeJohnette is a really unique drummer. His influence on drumming has really only come to the fore in the last 10 or 20 years. And a lot of the drummers that I am seeing emerging on the jazz scene now seem to entirely come out of Jack DeJohnette. Yusuf Days would be one of those. Another would be Mackay McRaven. Another one would be with Louis Cole. They all seem to have aspects of Jack DeJohnette. And John Abercrombie here is not playing distorted guitar like he does with the Billy Cobham group. It's clean guitar, and he's playing very spatially. He is not relying on bebop lines, and he's not relying on sort of blues licks. He is playing in a style which really is a forerunner to the Ornette Coleman style approach we're going to see coming from Pat Metheny and Schofield. This is a monumental jazz rock album. It's one that I forget because it's not that high powered, but it is still undoubtedly jazz rock. It's an absolute classic. Now, they did go back into the studio in the early 80s and brought Michael Brecker with them and made an album called Night. That album I got before Timeless. That was the first one I heard. So the thing that blew me away in terms of this organ trio was the album Night. And then to have Brecker on there as well, who is obviously sublime in his approach. That album is, for me, as great, I'd hate to say, but maybe even greater, but it comes from the 1980s. But you can cheat if you want and go and check that one out. The Gateway stuff that he did is absolutely great. There's some really good stuff from Abercrombie. I did knock him once, and I felt bad after it, you see. I can knock rock bands till the cows come home, and I never feel guilty. Kiss, Aerosmith, they can all get my ire. But when I knock a jazz musician, I always feel bad afterwards, and I should never have done it. I am sorry, Mr. Abercrombie. And of course, John Abercrombie had the greatest moustache in rock. A real 70s porno star moustache. That's what I'm saying. John Holmes, he had the full John Holmes going on. Old Abercrombie did. He wasn't a handsome man, and I don't know whether that's influenced me, but he more than made up for it with his moustache, which is really resplendent. There's a bit of humour for you. Why is John Abercrombie bringing it out? Why is he bringing it out of me? I don't know what it is with him. There's very few people that try and pursue a comedy angle around jazz rock and prog musicians. I do hope you appreciate I'm possibly the only person doing this, trying to get some humour out of John Abercrombie's moustache. Dave Chappelle, Stuart Lee, who else? Other comedians. I was trying to go for somebody trite like Michael McIntyre. They never could have come on stage and joke about John Abercrombie's moustache. I took a vow this week to go back to serious YouTubing and do what I do and start talking about jazz and prog and fusion and bringing my knowledge and all that in, and to try and eschew the humour. And it's creeping back in. It's like an evil goblin sat in a little jar at my side, and he's poking his head out. I call him Van the little evil goblin, and he's always coming out and trying to make you lot laugh. Unlike Van Morrison, who would never do that, would he? But let's not bring him into this wonderful list with really actually good albums on, full of beautiful chords and beautiful rhythms and beautiful notes and lovely compositions that take you on a journey and take you out, you know, and reach your heart and your head, you know, not just somebody randomly barking at you over 3 chords you've heard 1,000,000 times in your life. Right, so shall we move on to number 6? Number 6, right, there's a guitarist in the early 70s who's just... He's one of the guitarists. He's one of the guys, but he's not that well known like a John McLaughlin or Larry Coryell. It is Bill Connors. And Bill Connors really, in the early 70s, came out playing some incredible jazz rock fusion. Then he went all strange and he didn't want to play with Return to Forever anymore. And he goes out and he signs to ECM and he makes these classical guitar albums, completely different change of style. They're great, they're wonderful. And he carries on that. We never hear this sort of brutal, fiery, rip your face off guitar playing that we hear in the early 70s on a handful of jazz rock albums. In fact, really only 2, maybe 3. In the 80s, he comes back and he brings albums out like Assembler, and he seems to have basically, turned into Alan Holdsworth. It's a testament to his ability on guitar that he can do that. Not many guitarists could. But when I heard those albums with Kim Plainfield on drums, one of my heroes, and I went and checked it out because Kim was on, because I had his advanced concepts books when I was young, and I thought Kim Plainfield was a fantastic drummer. Sadly, he died a few years back. And so I went and checked it out. I was shocked. So we're left with 2, maybe 3 albums. That would be Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy, the first Return to Forever album. It would be Love, Love by Julian Priester, which is sort of Bitch's Brew. Doesn't feature that much Bill Connors. He's much more psychedelic on that, but he has got a bit of overdrive. In fact, he's got quite a bit of chorus and flange going on as well, but it's interesting. But for me, the height of Bill Connorsness is his playing on the second Stanley Clarke album called Stanley Clarke. Now, every time I do a list, if I was going to do the bass albums from the 70s jazz rock, it would be Stanley Clarke, because he brings all the slapping in. If I was going to bring incredible keyboard albums in, Jan Hammer's off the scale on this and given room to just blow. You know, he's not being pushed into the background like John McLaughlin. You didn't notice John's always doing that with Jan. He's got Jan Hammer in the band, and it's like, where's the Jan Hammer solos? There's a few every now and then, you know, but I wanted more because I love Jan. And Bill Connors comes in on that album and it just takes your face off. He has a screaming approach to guitar. Oh, it's like Hendrix, it's like John McLaughlin. It's what I call, you know, screamy, bendy guitar playing, but not so much in the blues idiom. It's coming out of something else, maybe Coltrane, I don't know. I've talked about this album so many times. Stanley Clarke did a run of incredible albums in the 70s, including albums like Journey to Love, School Days, you know, the whole host of stuff. I love Rock, Pebbles and Sand. That's a great album. Some fiery fusion stuff. He did do a few, you know, jazz, few Zach crimes against humanity, we'll let us say. But even on those albums, there's always a bit when he gets the old funky Stanley Clarke thumb out and blows you away. And he always has great players on those albums. Great Ray Gomez pops up, another guitarist that didn't make this list because I don't think there's a definitive album for the 70s for Ray. Maybe Venusian Summer, maybe Narada Michael Walden's solo album, mainly School Days, but there's other guitarists on there as well. So it's all a bit strange, I don't know. But Ray Gomez, I felt, is the one I've missed off. So at least I've mentioned him here. This Stanley Clarke album, I've talked about it so many times. It's just one of the greatest jazz rock albums. And the guitar playing is incredible. That's what I've got at number 6. Shall we move on? Number 5. At number 5, from 1975, I have Bright Size Life, the very first debut album by Pat Metheny. Pat Metheny was a young guitarist in the 1960s. He was actually a prodigy. His ability was so incredible, was that when he went to Berkeley, they just took him on as a teacher. And I think he was literally 12 at the time. That's not true, but he was pretty young. He was taught by Mick Goodrick, and he eventually takes over in his dream band from Mick Goodrick, which is the Gary Burton band. And Gary Burton is pursuing a style of jazz rock which is much more rooted in the melodic aspects of the Beatles. You know, Gary Burton has this sort of epiphany that he realises that the Beatles are playing quite strange and interesting chord progressions, but not related to the 2-5-1 in which jazz harmony is rooted. And he starts to write compositions like that. And this doesn't catch on. The Mavish Orchestra then catches on. The guy that brings that approach to the fore is undoubtedly Pat Metheny. And by the time he's offered a deal by ECM, the same label that's got Gary Burton, he has got a band, which is an astonishing band. They're fiery and massively underrated Bob Moses on drums, an incredible player. And on bass, he's got a very young Jaco Pastorius. And this band has been playing a lot together. And so there's an empathy and a harmoniousness with the band, which is very rare. You know, they seem to walk into this studio and they just seem to, it's almost like psychic what they're doing on the album. There has been talk that the ECM production approach pulled a little bit of the fieriness out of this album, but the truth is, this album, not at the time, it took a while for Pat Metheny to get a hold. And then, of course, Jaco in 76, the following year, goes stratospheric. And everyone goes back to this album. And this sort of much cooler sound is the sound that goes into jazz rock, and we start to hear it cropping up in other places. It's a move away from the sort of brutal, fiery approach of Return to Forever or the Mahavishnu Orchestra. But I think a lot of that's got to do with the ECM production. We hear exactly the same sound on Timeless by Jan Hammer and John Abercrombie, the aforementioned. And I've said aforementioned many a time today. So those of you who played the normal drinking game with me, and don't think I don't know it, that I'm going to mention a certain, 70s rock god, singer of a, and I haven't mentioned that person, right? So there's no point in trying to play it. I am not going to mention him on this. So you're not going to be able to get drunk at my expense and then put it in the comments as though you have invented something new that I mentioned someone I used to work with over and over again. I'm pretty sure you would do if you did. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it does not matter. But aforementioned, I've said it again. Anybody who's gone for aforementioned in this game is probably paralytic by now. Not parasitic. Like I feel some people who put their nasty comments in. There they are, hating me day after day. I know who you are, always putting in nasty comments. Thinking, why didn't you come here if you don't like me so much? And then when I had my friend Rob on the other day, it was like, oh, we love Rob. I've been here 1,000 videos. You're just getting fed up with me. It's like an old married couple. And I'm the wife. And you lot, now you get into your midlife crisis. Although I think a lot of you have gone way past your midlife crisis, but those of you who are having your midlife online crisis want to go off and have a bit of a philander with Rob Grocott, do you now? Well, do you think he knows all this about jazz rock? Of course he doesn't. Let's get back into it. At number 4, I have Wired by Jeff Beck. One of the greatest jazz rock albums from the 70s. What can I say about this? I'm not going to mention the Narada Michael album, but he makes this bloody album. It's some of the greatest drumming ever recorded. Jan Hammer is on here as well. He makes this album. I mean, it's just monumental. It's incredible. It sounds amazing. Of course, it was produced by George Martin, but he didn't mix it. Jeff Beck wasn't happy with the mix of Wired. Do you know that? And then when he hooked up with Jan Hammer, Jan was asked to overdub some keyboard solos. Some of the tracks Jan did all, like Blue Wind, he did that all himself in his studio for Jeff. But things like Lead Boots, he's overdubbing those solos on top of the band jamming. It's quite astonishing, really. Also, I have to say, if you like Wired and you like Narada Michael Walden and Jan Hammer, check out Marching Powder by Tommy Bolin as well, because that's before all of this. Tommy Bolin's really important to the move that Jeff Beck makes here. Everyone goes on about how great Jeff Beck is, and my God, he was great, all the greatest guitarists of all time. And he probably was, but don't think it comes out of nowhere. Ray Gomez, Roy Buchanan, and Tommy Bolin all played a lot in terms of shaping the sound of Jeff Beck. That's all I'm going to say. Wired's fantastic. What shall we say about it? Lead Boots is possibly my favourite track. The drumming on Play With Me and Sophie is just I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. It's absolutely great. Jan Hammer, that's where I first heard Jan Hammer. That Moog sound, that bendy Moog sound, that's the sound of jazz rock fusion. But there's so much other goodies. For example, Jeff Beck, who is a rock guitarist, taking an approach to a jazz standard like Goodbye Punk by Hat. And to this day, I don't know what Jeff Beck's doing over those changes. I don't know whether they rewrote the changes, because it sounds like there's a harmonic movement. I'm not sure it's the Goodbye Punk by Hat changes. And Jeff Beck seems to play through them, but in a way that's absolutely magnificent. And Beck's sound just breathes. It's like he's got his breath in it. He takes that air in and he breathes it back out. It's like a cosmic breath almost with Jeff Beck. He's rootsy and bluesy, and yet he's ethereal at the same time. Back at this time, he was playing, I think, a Les Paul more than the Strat, and there's no tremolo on there. It's all in his fingers, and I really love that. And there's so much going on in the guitar here, and his tone is absolutely wonderful. There's some really great, Wilbur Bascom on bass has done some great stuff as well. I've tried to mention all the other stuff that's going on this album. It's absolutely wonderful. That's why I got number 4. He's Wired. And number 3, I've got to represent Al Di Meola. Now, Al Di Meola is a bit of a shock, isn't he? Bill Connors doesn't want to do Return Forever anymore, so he jumps ship. And there's a guy, keyboardist, that's a jazz rock fusion pioneer, playing stuff very complex that is very similar to what Chick Corea now wants to do with the Return to Forever. And it's a keyboardist called Barry Miles. When I come around to do the 10 greatest keyboard performances on jazz rock albums, Barry Miles is going to be in there. He's very important and underrated. And he's got this very young guitarist called Al Di Meola, and he's putting Al Di Meola through his paces. Al Di Meola is basically, he's a rock guitar fan, he's a Beatles fan, he's come up with all that, but he's also come up having a really strict guitar training, and he is a student of jazz guitar as well. And where John McLaughlin came in with a certain approach to guitar that just lifts guitar up to this, you know, a few years later, Al Di Meola emerges and pushes it up again. And this idea of prog metal, the idea of a shredder, the idea of sort of the harmonic minor mode being used, you know, to explore this sort of very Spanishy heaviness that we hear with Yngwie Malmsteen and a whole bunch of prog metalers in the 1980s, all that is rooted in Al Di Meola. Al Di Meola comes out of the Return to Forever band in 1976 at a superstar level. He's already made an album called Land of the Midnight Sun. And on that, he's also brought Jaco Pastorius into the studio. In fact, possibly Jaco's first appearance on a major label. You know, so that Land of the Midnight Sun album is really great. And I have a very soft spot for it. It's very jazz rock fusion. It's got Alphonse Musen on there, Stanley Clarke's on there, I think Chick Corea's on there. There's a whole host, I guess Barry Miles on keyboards is on there. Very percussion heavy, and tracks like The Wizard, they're just brilliant. But his second album, Elegant Gypsy, he gets to a sound, and the sound is like classically influenced heavy metal Santana. And right at the centre is this incredible approach that Al Di Meola has on guitar, which reminds me almost of the heels of a virtuoso flamenco dancer. He's very percussive and very rhythmical. Al Di Meola is obsessed by rhythm, right? And you can see he's basically approaching the guitar like he's a timbale player. I've interviewed Al Di Meola on this channel. It's very interesting how this solo career came about, because I don't know whether it would have if Chick Corea hadn't tried to get his girlfriend into the band Return to Forever, because it was around about 75, 76. I've just interviewed the guys from the Mavish Ducks who played on Vision M Beyond, and they were asking me about it. What happened to Gail Moran? What's going on? Gail Moran hooked up with Chick Corea in the mid-70s, and so, you know, she could sing and play keyboards. Got this beautiful ethereal voice. You hear it on the Mavish Ducks show. Chick Corea is always a little bit behind John McLaughlin in terms of copying the sort of fusion that he's doing. He goes, maybe we need a singer like Gail Moran. And as if she's my girlfriend, oh, let's get her in the band. So he goes down to Return Forever and says, you know, do you want to get my girlfriend in on vocals? And the band go, no. And then Chick Corea, being a bit of an autocrat, and there's a lot of these stories about it, he said, well, I'm not having it. It's Gail or the band. No, it's Gail or leave the band. It's something like that. And they all sit there and go, well, I'm not doing it anymore. And they all jumped ship. They all did. Al Di Meola with Elegant Gypsy makes one of the biggest selling jazz or jazz rock albums. It's in the top 10 biggest. Don't know how many million copies he sold. Stanley Clarke sold a whole ton. I feel sorry for older Lenny White, because Venusian Summer and Astral Pirates and Big City, they're ridiculous albums. I love the post Return to Forever albums. I see them all as part of the Return to Forever world. Elegant Gypsy is a defining album, and it's a shock, even today, to people who've grown up with people like Guthrie Govan and, you know, people like Sean Lane, or even mate Roy Marchbank playing at unbelievable speed. But it starts here with Aldi Meola. It starts here, 1976, Elegant Gypsy, which is what I've got at number 3. Right, at number 2, I have, and I don't know why I've put this high. I almost feel like Spectrum with Tommy Bolin should be at this point. But when I did the list, that's what I felt. I'd done the list and I thought, I've got this right. Now, this is my thinking, because the album is Believe It by Tony Williams. All right. When I think of jazz rock guitarists, there's a guy that, for me, trumps all of them, and that's Alan Holdsworth. Alan Holdsworth does emerge in the 70s. In fact, in 1973, he's playing on Belladonna by Ian Carl's Nucleus. By 1975, he's changed the world, playing on Bundles by Soft Machine. He does some incredible guitar playing on Gaseous by Gong, which is possibly my favourite of the sort of fusion albums he made in the 1970s. His own solo album, Velvet Darkness, that he disowned, it was recorded around about 75, I think, is also fantastic, with Narada Michael Walden on drums. You know, really, really incredible album. Alfonso Johnson on bass. So I really sat down and thought, well, where is his guitar playing absolutely definitive? And my gut reaction was Gaseous by Gong, because I love that album. And I thought, well, hang on. Gaseous it's a little bit more floatier. It's a bit more drum orientated. Tony Williams, who is one of the great jazz rock drummers and one of the great jazz drummers, defines, I think, that sound on Believe It, his first album with the new Tony Williams Lifetime, which also featured Alan Pasqua on keyboards. Who was on bass? Tony Newton, was that the guy? Anyway, can't quite remember. I hope that's the guy. And Alan Holdsworth steps into this band, and him and Tony is like a match made in heaven. And throughout this album, on every single track, Holdsworth is soloing. On every single moment, he's in there doing something that's very Alan Holdsworth. For many people who can't quite take this sort of harmonic density and complexity of Alan's solo albums, this is a great place to start. It's funky, it's rocky, it's heavy. Tony Williams is amazing. Alan Holdsworth is amazing. And I believe that if you think about this album in 75, which I think is when it came out, 75 is it? Can you think of hearing that in 1975 and hearing what Holdsworth is doing? Now, let's just be fair with Holdsworth. Even when he did Bundles, even when you listen to him on Belladonna, the sound is there, but it's not quite developed. I feel like there's another notch he's gone up to when you start to listen to him to on around this time, 76. His sound's changed. I think he's been able to get a guitar which is closer, pickup-wise and action-wise, to be able to fulfill the things he wants to do. It's just mind-blowing. So that's what I've got up to. And also, the reason I'll put it in is because Holdsworth was happy with this album. He was also happy with Gaseous, but he loved this band. He loved this band. This band made another album with Alan Holdsworth called $1 Million Legs. It's like an opportunity just lost. Tony Williams has got the greatest jazz rock band on the planet at that point, and yet what does he choose to do? Try and get some disco hit. And this undid Tony Williams throughout the 70s, without a doubt. I think he was always chasing some sort of commercial idea, and his idea of what commercial was just wasn't commercial. It was just weird, and it blights his albums. I know some people love it. Right, what have I got at number 1? Again, my favourite album of all time. I'm not even going to talk about it. Visions of the Emerald Beyond by the Mavish Orchestra, made in 1974, back end of 74. Recorded in 75. I've just interviewed, and I can't believe this, I got together Phil Hershey, Bob Knapp and Premick Russell Tubbs, all in the same thing, talking about this. Right, I've interviewed so far Narada Michael Walden, I've interviewed Jean-Luc Ponty, and then I've got those three. Ralph Armstrong next. I wonder if I could even get Gail Moran. That would be incredible. I don't even know where people like Carol Sheave and Martha Westbrook are even alive. And there's some other people in that band as well. Very mysterious. Of course, the elusive man himself is the great man John McLaughlin. I'm not going to talk about this album. I've talked about it so many times. But I think, John McLaughlin has basically got a YouTube channel dedicated to him here. Right? That's the bottom line. I've been talking about John McLaughlin. And everybody who's worked with him, his friends, his family, I've interviewed his dog. Everybody has been on this channel. I've done 1 million videos. Here I am putting one of his albums at the top again. What do I have to do to get Mr. McLaughlin on this channel? right? There was a time when I thought it's going to happen, and it used to frighten me. I thought one of these days it's going to happen, and someone will hook me up and oh yeah, I'll do an interview. I mean, I've had Sting on here, but I haven't had John McLaughlin. Why? Does he know about the channel? Right? Does he like the channel? Have I said something he doesn't like? Is it because I can't pronounce his name properly? What have I done that John will not come on my channel? Right? I am the man to interview John McLaughlin. He's been on other channels. He'd said, oh, look, they got 1,200 subscribers. I think, what the hell's going on, John? I'm putting it out there at the end of this video. We got into a rant. I want John on my channel, right? I used to be nervous of it. I still am nervous of it, but there's another part. I think it has to happen for the circle to be finally drawn, right? John has to appear on my channel, right? It's part of, this is the thing. This is how I see it, you see. I think it's got to happen, right? It's got to happen. Because John McLaughlin affected me so much when I heard him at 15, 16. It wasn't a technical thing. It was an emotional thing. That's what I got from John McLaughlin. It was an emotional thing, and it really affected me deeply, really deeply. As time went on, people said, oh, he's all technical. He's just playing fast. He doesn't play like this. He can't swing. And people pushed against John McLaughlin. And I thought, no, they're wrong. They are absolutely wrong. They do not understand what the guy's doing because they don't understand the references. They don't understand Miles. They don't understand Coltrane. They don't understand Bill Evans. They don't understand all these musicians. They don't understand, like, Big Bill Broonzy. You know, they don't understand flamenco guitar. They don't understand Indian classical music. They don't understand how John, in that melting pot that he was born into, where rock and roll was being forged, and there he is alongside the Jimmy Pages and the Graham Bonds and the John Paul Jones and the Ginger Bakers and the Jack Bruces and the Hendrixes, and he's there with them all, you know. And as one of the guys in the Mavish Orchestra said, when they toured with Jeff Beck, who everybody seems to think is the greatest guitarist in the world, and he is, I love Jeff Beck, I absolutely love Jeff Beck, but as they said when they did that tour together, at the end of the night, Jeff Beck would take his guitar off, lay it on the floor, and then bow down to the master, John McLaughlin. Now, he needs to come on my channel. It's not fair. It's not fair. I'm 57 years old, right? I shouldn't want this to happen. I should be able to, I mean, maybe he's tested me. Maybe it's the final test. Maybe he's there watching it and smiling right now, John is. Maybe he's smiling and going, no, not ready yet. You are not ready, Mr. Edwards. You are not ready. You know, you may think you're ready, but you're not ready. And that could be what's happening. Or it could be that he has never watched it and he has no idea what I'm doing. And then it means that I am like an inconsequential speck in the universe. And I don't like that feeling. That's where it stops and starts. So maybe as I analyse myself here, sat before you as I am, maybe there was a feeling I got for John's music that I wasn't an inconsequential spark in the universe, that I actually was a part of the universe, and there was a great power in that. And in realising that, it then forged the direction of my life. And there may be that I am either under the correct or incorrect belief that this should now be rewarded, or not even rewarded. It should be, the logical fulmination of this should be me being able to give that back to John in the form of an interview. Because if I interview him, it will be rubbish, because all I'm going to tell him is how great he is. I mean, if you watch my first interview with Gerard and Michael Walden, I'm barely in control of things, really. And the thing is, it wasn't John McLaughlin's whole career. It was John's work with Billy Cobham and Narada Michael Walden, and I was a drummer, and that was how I responded. And they've both been on the channel, so maybe I have done it. Maybe John's not coming on because he said, Andy, when will you realise you have done this? You don't need me to come on to do this. Maybe he's thinking that, or maybe he's just not thinking anything about me at all. But I want him to think something about me. That's what I want. That's all I want. I want him to be thinking something about me. And if he is, just give me a message and say, this is John McLaughlin, I'm thinking about you. I won't bother you. andyedwardsdrums@gmail.com. That's not for the rest of you to bother me with the messages. I get bothered by people all day long, but they're probably doing it to me, and then I ignore them. So it's a pecking order of ignorance. Who ignored John McLaughlin? Who's above John that ignored him? Who would it be? And Miles Davis didn't ignore him. Miles Davis wanted him in the band and he said, no, I'm playing with Tony Williams. Imagine that. I would have joined the band. I would have dropped Tony Williams in it. I don't care how good he is. I wouldn't want to go around in Tony Williams' lifetime. They had rubbish gigs. They had no backing. In Miles, you have good hotels. You would have been able to play whatever you want because, Miles would just let them do whatever they want, didn't they? Easy job. Just jamming over a vamp for hours on end, not trying to play complex stuff like Vuelto Abenjo or whatever it's called by the Tony Williams' lifetime. No. There is something I'm trying to solve here in all of this. Anyway, that's my chat about number one for you. That's the chat that you've had about Visions of the Emerald Beyond. And I will be mentioning Visions of the Emerald Beyond again in the future. Okay, it's my favourite album, and this is about an album ranking channel. And so this is going to be mentioned in the future. And the more I open that door, the more you'll be able to have me explore the dark shadow of my psyche as I have just done, for your entertainment. And if you enjoy that type of entertainment, and if you sat there going, something, Rick Beato or Pete Pardo at Sea of Tranquility, notes, reviews, classic album, they never do that. I've never seen them do that. Andy's got his own thing going on. It's this underlying nervous breakdown that always seems to be apparent under the surface of these reviews. I find quite compelling. If you do, subscribe. Because why aren't you subscribed? If you are subscribed, just ignore this bit. You can become a patron. I've got a patron. You become a free member. You can become a paid member. Just click on it now and have a look. There's loads of content there. You will never get to the back end of the content of my patron. I don't even know what I've done. It goes back a couple of years now. It's just rammed and rammed full of all sorts of stuff. Right, you'll get lost in it. You will. You can become a free or a paid member. Like I say, if you do become a free member, you won't get access to that much. What else have I got? I've got a PayPal tip jar as well. Go and click on the old PayPal tip jar. If you want to give me some money, this is how I'm earning my living now. If you don't do it, I've had it. And then I won't be worried about chat to John McLaughlin. Then I'll just be worried about, feeding and clothing my kids, which is still a major worry for me. It's a major worry for us all, isn't it, at the moment? The world seems to be in a very strange place. If you were interested in the strange place that the world is, I have a new channel. And it's called, I can't remember the title of it. This is the best thing. I think it's called Something, Anything, Nothing. I don't know if there's a link down below. I've kept it quite separate. But it's there. You'll find it. Me talking about politics, and I'm changing my opinion. Those of you who've been a bit upset in my right wing thing I've got going on, it's interesting as I'm doing a lot of videos there. It's interesting how that is changing as well, and I'm basically moving to a realm where I don't trust any of them anymore. So if you don't trust any of them anymore, and you can't buy any food, and you're worried that you've spent all your money on some house that you now own, that you'll probably get burnt away, when you go senile and taken into some home, and what's the point in all that? What was the point in all that? If that's what you feel like, go and check that one out. And I'm going to announce there's another channel coming soon as well, a third one. And then I will have the three. I'm into the law of three. I need 3 channels to do everything I want to do. And when that channel comes out, I will be done. I promise you there'll be no more channels. But I'm trying to build a little empire here. So please try and support me in that. I have world domination as a goal. I have moved my studio around today. It's taken me 2 days, so I'm a little bit behind on my videoing. But it's much better now. We're utilising the whole space. You have to utilise the whole space, don't you? It's a big space in here. You have to utilise the whole space. Right, so we're done. I've got nothing more to say. Thanks for watching this video. See you on the next one.